And he said, listen, he says, he seemed like a good guy. He says, I'd love to find ways to work with you. He says, but, I'm going to forget you in 2 or 3 weeks. He said, and you got to make sure that you stay in the front of my mind when I'm at a board meeting and there's a company that could use, your money.
Superclusters is where we demystify the secrets, stories, and tactics behind the money that moves the venture capital world. The sign of a great conversation is always one where you walk out with more questions than when you went in. I've been lucky enough to have had several with our guest today, and this one is no exception. Anurag Chandra is the Chief Investment Officer at a single-family office, as well as the chairman of the investment committee at the San Jose Pension Plan, where he's had a major hand in hiring the CIO there, as well as rebuilding the portfolio and determining the risk budget. What the hell is a risk budget? What does it mean to be an asymmetric information junkie? How do you build a portfolio at an underfunded pension plan? I'm glad you asked, but it's something that you should probably hear directly from Anurag himself in this episode. He's also spent time and worked with legendary figures from Peter Thiel to Keith Boy, Bill Draper, Mark Stevens, just to name a few. Anurag has a unique proclivity for quote recall, which you'll see in spades in this episode as well. I also want to give a shout out to my good friend Becca Goldman for making this happen. Someone, if you don't know about, you should. And someone who's one of the most thoughtful human beings and community builders out there. But without further ado, Anurag Chandra.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation, especially if it's a continuation of what we did at Phil's.
This will not be a continuation of Phil's, but I have to ask you this. And I warned you I'd ask you about this.
Yeah.
And this is especially true for anyone watching on video. If you're listening to audio, I apologize. You'll get more context on this in just a bit. So, Anurag, you are wearing 2 things that make you seem like a walking contradiction. First of all, for those listening to audio, can you describe what you're wearing? And then 2, why are you wearing it?
I am wearing a Boston Red Sox hat, and I am wearing a New York Giants, football Giants t-shirt with the stars and stripes embedded into the NY logo. So a walking contradiction. I mean, I'm a walking contradiction in general. My wife has said that I'm born on a cusp between Scorpio and Sagittarius, so I can be super calm and chill like a Sagittarius, and then I can also have the stinger come out like a Scorpio. So maybe that there is something to astrology after all, but full disclosure, I'm not a believer. But this is all about my upbringing. So my parents immigrated from India to Boston, and my father got his PhD in Boston and was a big sports fan growing up in India. In fact, he played soccer at his university, which is a totally different deal. That's a club thing. It's not like he was some recruited superstar. It's more to indicate just his passion and enthusiasm for sports. And so when he got to America, his associates made him into an American. That's how he became an American, rooting for Bill Russell and the Celtics and Bobby Orr and the Bruins and Carly Yastrzemski, who's my favorite baseball player, and the Boston Red Sox. But when I was a baby, we moved to New York when my dad got on faculty and in New York. And I'm an old man compared to you. There was no ESPN. In fact, I was for the first generation in high school.
Hey, we're not ageist here, okay? We're not going to play the age card here.
So, you were limited to local sports. There were 2 local stations, and then on the weekends, the major networks would have a game of the week. So I either had to watch Yankees or Mets for baseball. And so what really happened is growing up in New York, I had to develop an affinity for a New York team. And, baseball, there's no way it was going to be the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees and the Red Sox absolutely hate each other. And I always tell fans from Boston, I'm like, you guys had it so easy, so far away from enemy lines. I grew up 12 minutes from Yankee Stadium as a Red Sox fan. I got beat up quite a bit by the Italian kids in my neighborhood for rooting for the Red Sox. So I feel like I'm a diehard earned Red Sox fan as opposed to some of the folks who, all the way up in Maine, if you're a New England Red Sox fan, I mean, it's easy. You're so far from enemy lines. And so I ended up adopting a New York team and maintaining an allegiance with a Boston team, which is strange because the 2 cities are really hardcore sports rivals. I personally think we should all dislike Philly sports fans, so I know I've alienated all the listeners from Philadelphia already, but if they're from the Northeast, they'll appreciate it. Hating is a special quality in the Northeast. Being a hater.
There are two folks who have been on the pod already who are some of the largest Philly fans. Three, two and a half, maybe. Matt Curtolo has been nice about things, but he is a sports fan in and of itself himself. But the two other sports fans in which we've had coming from the Philly neck of the woods or celebrating Philly, one's Sean Warrington from Gresham,
Hmm.
Gresham Partners out in Chicago,
Yep.
and the other one is Jamie Rode, who's now at Screen Door. But when I had her on, she was still at Verdis, which naturally makes sense to be in that Philly neighborhood. But they
Sure.
are heavy
They bring
sports
it.
fans.
They
Yeah.
bring it. They are committed. So I will give them begrudging respect because they are diehards.
So I think this bleeds really well into my next question about you being like, you were Boston Red Sox as well as New York Giants. You've described yourself as a man without a home, but comfortable in everyone's home. What did you mean by that?
The thrust of that, I think, and I'm sure that came up when we were together at Phil's. The first of that is well, there's two aspects. The first is uh, all of our family when I was a child were back in India, so we would go visit regularly. And I didn't speak English full time until I was in kindergarten. Hindi is my first language, and my mom took me at 4 months old for a few months, and so
Right.
that part of my life is formative, and I love my family in India to death, but we were thousands of miles away from them. And I think I've always tried to recreate that sense of home wherever I've been to try and create family. I really found that where I went to college. I found that with a group of friends in my hometown of Ardsley, New York. And I think that search and that desire, because I didn't have cousins, so I could just drive 20 minutes, and go see, like, or get on a plane and see them in 3 or 4 hours. I think I was always trying to recreate that sense of family, which is maybe a proxy for the word home in your question. The second thing is when I was in India, I was always the American kid. No matter how well I spoke Hindi, no matter how idiomatically I could crack jokes, I probably even look different. We're fed here with trans fats and all this other kind of stuff, like, it's bigger. I'm Gen X. I'm convinced we're the most poisoned generation because the EPA wasn't founded till 73. So most of the regulations to improve the quality of the air and water had not really kicked in until the mid 80s. And then by the same token, we were just processed foods, no awareness of trans fats or processing. So we had the worst of both. And I mean, I was a skinny kid and I was athletic, and so, as I wasn't putting on weight. There was no physical sign that I might be unhealthy. So I ate and drank everything. I mean, it just, oh my God, what a terrible diet I had growing up. So we don't even want to go there. But in the US, there a day didn't go by where someone didn't either intentionally or inadvertently make me feel like an outsider or the other, because there were very few. There's two other Indian families in Ardsley that I remember. And so if kids wanted to pick and be mean and tease, the easy thing to pick on was my name or being Indian or being brown. And then there were a lot of well-intentioned people. Like, my favorite was always like, "Oh, you speak English so well." Well, you wouldn't say
Hmm.
that to German European kids whose parents immigrated from Germany or Europe because he or she's white, right? So you always feel a bit like an outsider, even though home is New York and Ardsley. And in India, even though I felt kinship and like that it was home to me, people made me feel. So I've always been made to feel like an outsider everywhere I am. And I know other people who share that experience. I've had conversations with folks who can relate to what I just said. So home is the most important thing, or one of the most important things that people feel, whether it's being rooted or grounded to a piece of land or to a sense of community. And so I think that explains why I may have, I like the way I said it to you. I don't think I could have repeated it. So it was pithier than I expected.
And now it's immortalized in the hallowed halls of Superclusters. So you can always refer back to it and people will always know you for that line.
That's right. I love it. I'm now memorialized in one of the world's best podcasts.
I did not pay you to say that. I did not pay you to say that, but thank you. There's something you told me when actually at Phil's, which you were at the Stanford Review and you were, I believe, a year younger than Peter Thiel, who had started the Stanford Review. How did you find your way into a fledgling organization like that?
The organization found me. There weren't many conservatives on campus in the late '80s, so we sort of became a small world. I only met Peter once. Keith Raboy was the one who recruited me to the review, and I it was late. I mean, I was I think junior, and Peter was graduating. So I actually think the first year I wrote, Peter was, if he might have still been involved as a graduate because he was at Stanford Law School as well. See, I think he
Yeah.
actually still was involved. Um, but I think I met Peter once or twice. Mostly did my submissions with Keith, but I think I wrote a couple of times. I wasn't a prolific writer. I think they were looking for. I think they might have had staff writers at the time, but I think that they were, like you said, fledgling and looking for different folks who might want to contribute content. So that's how that came about. Yeah, and it turned into a bit of a juggernaut after those early days.
What drew you personally to the organization? I know Keith recruited you, but why did you personally want to be a part of Stanford Review, especially in your junior year when I imagine most people are focused on where their career lies?
Oh, I'm sure I was thinking about that as well. But, the nice thing about a college environment is you can do a few things at the same time, special in those 4 years that you can do that. Look, I've been interested in politics and public policy since I was in middle school. And I was a Reagan kid. I was a happy Reagan warrior. And so when the opportunity came to be a part of the marketplace of ideas and the exchange of ideas, and knowing that there were very few people in our camp who were trying to express themselves into that marketplace, I wanted to contribute. I'm sure there's an element of ego involved with like, hey, I have something worthwhile to say.
Yeah.
So it was all of those things. I mean, I was pretty well known and pretty vocal when I was on campus, Keith and I getting to know one another, which is natural. I mean, people tend to find one another when there aren't that many of them. Like you get your own speakeasy where you can kind of talk freely about things.
Speaking of provocative ideas in which you've had, one of my favorite Anuragisms has been the four assholes of America. Can you elaborate to those who are unfamiliar with this? What are the four assholes of America?
And geographically speaking, it's DC, New York, Los Angeles, and the Bay Area. And
Yeah.
DC is the government power center. New York is the finance power center. LA is the entertainment power center, and we are the tech and entrepreneurship power center. And what I've said is that all of them share a similar vapidness and shallowness, whether it's wanting to be famous or it has to do with materialism and a sense of elitism. And I think what I've said is the reason why I'm happy among the four to be in the Silicon Valley ecosystem is that at the end of all of it, even if there's a bunch of inauthenticity, even if there's a bunch of people who want to be a part of the digerati for ego and personal fame and fortune so they can have, 15 yachts, whatever the case may be, at least the fundamental underlying pursuit of entrepreneurship, creating a product, putting it out in the marketplace, the creation of a product and acceptance of it, the supply and demand, that relationship, I'm a good old fashioned dyed in the wool Adam Smith guy. Like when that happens, I think that's virtuous. I think it obviously drives those microtransactions built at scale drive uh, an economy and creation of economic value. And over the last 300 years, there are many things that we've done poorly within the construct of capitalism. But capitalism, in and of itself, has moved so many people out of poverty, increased standards of living, right? And that all comes from this exchange of I supply something to the marketplace and it chooses to like it or not to like it. Um, and I just value that more than building the next algorithmic trade that is a nanosecond faster than someone else's trade on an exchange where the secondary market value, the liquidity that is produced by secondary markets, stock exchanges, was probably already maximized 20 years ago. Like, we're just playing on the margin now for personal gain and not necessarily social utility. So that's my personal opinion. I'm sure there are finance bros in New York who would strongly disagree with me, and that could be an interesting debate in and of itself. Um, like, I spent 5 years in Los Angeles, and I spent 9 months in DC, and really the currency in those two towns is popularity, and so I'll just leave it at that. There's an, I'll even give the finance bros more credit. So if I were to create a hierarchy, so yeah.
I love it that you have a propensity not to speak your mind, but paired with an innate curiosity to learn about things, which I think is really beautiful.
Silicon Valley is not what it was when I got here in the late night or came back to here from Los
Yeah.
Angeles in the late 90s. When I was here in college and earlier, it's a real HP engineering culture. And somewhere in the in for I can't really peg the time period. It does feel post Great Financial Crisis, which is a bit ironic. But around then, it felt like Silicon Valley became a place to come to get rich, like to build a career, like that
Yeah.
careerism of, go to the best school I can, get the best grades I can, and then get a job in investment banking or in consulting. It feels like people of that mindset didn't come here in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And I can't really speak to the 2000s. Maybe it was starting to blend. But I really feel like a lot of people like that come here. I think there are a lot of folks who do entrepreneurship in that linear manner, as opposed to, having some authentic product idea or something that's driving them from inside. But those people do still exist. And because of those people, I haven't moved. I threatened to move. I'm tired of the inauthenticity and the digerati and all of the noise that comes with it. And then, for instance, I'm working with a founding team PhD from Toronto and Caltech, and they have this incredible platform technology for artificial intelligence, and they are in search of MVP. They are so much brighter than me. They're so genuine. There's just innate optimism. Um, and almost a naivete, but I don't mean that pejoratively,
Hmm.
because they keep getting smarter every time they peel the next layer of the onion and they make contact with the market or trying to figure out this product. You can just see them getting better by leaps and bounds. And My God, I live for that. I mean, that is what keeps me in Silicon Valley. I would say I think 70% of the people I met were like that in 1998. Notwithstanding, the Internet 1.0 had a lot of charlatans. And now I feel like it's 30%. I mean, I really do feel like it's gone down, but they're there.
And so you would have pegged the number to be much higher back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, everything is just the scale is so much bigger. I think, I don't know if this is correct. You can fact check this, but someone I like in the institutional LP world told me that venture got bigger than private equity. I find that hard to believe, but
Oh, interesting.
whether or not that's right, directionally, the asset class, it probably should never have been an asset class, just continues to scale and scale and
Yeah.
scale. And so, you know, that capital has to back somebody.
Yeah.
And are the number of authentic entrepreneurs increasing? I don't know. Seems not to be the case, but yeah, this is incredibly anecdotal. I do try to be data driven. That this is really just personal observations over 25 years. They could be a total misdirect.
Yeah. I, with an earlier comment of venture becoming bigger than private equity, I don't have any numbers. So
Yeah,
people
it
feel
doesn't
free to,
sound. It does not sound right to me. Just
yeah.
full disclosure.
Like to like give that some nuance. If I were to give it credence, I imagine the dollar size of private equity is still far higher than venture.
I would
But there
too.
is potentially a possibility that there, in terms of number of firms or in terms of investing personnel, that venture may have eclipsed private equity. If I were to give that statement credence, again, I don't have the data, but
Yeah.
I'm just kind of thinking through things.
Yeah, possibly. Even if it's not right. I mean, we know that the industry is much bigger today than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. Speaking of the industry 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more than 20 years ago, I want to turn back the clock to a score, more over a score of years prior, specifically around give or take 1997. But you can tell me if I'm directionally accurate there in terms of year.
Yeah.
How does one find themselves in a position to have coffee with Mark Stevens 3 times a year?
You are good at your research. Uh, okay, that's really easy. The Sequoia partners, and I think part of the reason why they were the best in the world is they felt that the marginal value of returning that nth phone call was higher than everyone else did. They knew that good deals, good leads, good everything could be under the next rock. And so they were 24/7. I think there was a Western Association venture capital event at which a bunch of people were mingling. I showed up as a young nobody, as opposed to now being an old nobody. and
I
um,
would like to push back against the nobody comment, as
I
well as the
appreciate that.
old, by the way, just for the record.
My mom would agree with you on both accounts. So I've got two fans. I'll take it. And my wife, I've got
You have
three.
more than two. Let's be real.
So I think I just got a chance to say hi and shake hands with him, but I was a little too nervous to really engage too deeply, or didn't feel like I'd have a lot to add. And just sort of at the end of it, I said, "Hey, I'm new in the business. I'm looking to learn, and if you have time for coffee, I'd love to take you out." And he said, "Sure." He says, "Email me." So I emailed him, and to my surprise, he responded within 20 minutes.
20
And
minutes.
yeah, and I had an office at Sand Hill Road, 3000 Sand Hill Road, Building 3. Back then, Sequoia or that is that one or one? They were four, and
I'd love to remember that.
we just marched over to the Sun Deck, and it actually was. I think that time it was a coffee, and yeah, I would just reach out to him, and he was just gracious. I mean, it says just a lot more. I remember I reached out to Mike Moritz once about something. He called me back by 5 o'clock that day, driving back to his house in San Francisco, up to 80. I remember a couple of times. I even once got a phone call from Doug Leone when he found out I'd been looking at a deal that he was looking at. He just wanted someone else's opinion. My opinion? Like, why would he care about my opinion? Just the 360. I mean, no stone uncovered. They were animals. And growing up in the venture world as a young guy, I really admired Sequoia for their tenacity and their willingness to talk to a guy like me.
I just want to give some context to potentially those who may not know who Mark Stevens is, and the trio as well. Mark Stevens was the former managing partner at Sequoia, and before that, he was at Intel, and he was on the board of a name that I think everyone is familiar with today, NVIDIA, as well as the Golden State Warriors. And he was instrumental in many investment decisions: YouTube, Google, Yahoo, and obviously NVIDIA itself. So this guy's in many ways is a larger than life person. He's no longer actively at Sequoia. He's has his own, as you know, family office now. I'm curious for you. Yes, I'm sure they're willing to take a lot of calls, but I also imagine there were even more folks who also wanted their attention, but did not ever get their attention. And part of this is speculation. Part of this is potentially an assumption back in the 1990s. What do you think stood out? Was there a way that you were emailing folks that showed that you care, that you weren't just another person?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. You ask a lot of good questions, so you're gonna hear me pause and say, "Boy, that's a good question," over and over and over again. I did
Thank you.
something in those emails that was not intentional or strategic, but I am recalling I just wanted to learn. I grew up in a very intellectually curious family, and a lot of work is blocking and tackling and learning your processes, but I think there's an element to it which is developing your judgment. You also want to develop your temperament, but developing your judgment, and that's asking some of the more corner case questions, and that's trying to understand how do you how do you make decisions when you have 55-45 calls. Not everything is a 90-10 or a 100-0. In fact,
Mhm.
rarely are things binary. And so I think I would just bring the spirit of wanting to learn and saying, "Hey, I'm new to the industry. I'm really curious about," but I would say X, Y, and Z, right? And so I had been looking at a couple of semiconductor companies, and Mark Stevens is and was a tremendous chip investor. So I think that might have been one of the things. But I remember one of the greatest pieces of advice he gave me just on the topic of emails. It was in one of our I'm really disappointed now that you brought up Mark that I let that relationship atrophy. I know his CIO, Margot, who is just an amazing person and a brilliant CIO. And on a couple of occasions, I mentioned to her that I'm really disappointed that I let that atrophy. And she said, "Oh, we'll figure out when we can get you guys connected again." So you're reminding me that I need to reach out to Margot maybe at the end of the summer and say, "Hey, I would love to thank Mark for all of the mentorship." One of the things he said to me, it was so great. It's just the way he said it was awesome. It was so direct. It was so Sequoia, like in all the positive sense. Because I'm from New York, so I appreciate directness. It might have been after I think the second time we had lunch. And he said, "Listen," he says, "you seem like a good guy." He says, "I'd love to find ways to work with you." He says, "But, I'm going to forget you in 2 or 3 weeks." He said, "And you got to make sure that you stay in the front of my mind when I'm at a board meeting and there's a company that could use, your money." And, like the best way for you to do that is just shoot me emails from time to time and let me know what you're working on. But do not make them long. I don't need dissertations. He said, "Just, hey, Mark, I just closed the deal with blah, blah, blah. I just wanted to let you know how you're doing." He says, "It'll just keep you in the front of my mind." And I thought
Yeah.
that was great advice. I have done that occasionally. I haven't done that systematically, but I have on occasion just done that to make sure I stay in the front of someone's mind. And I thought that was great. That was a super good pro tip.
This might get a bit too scientific, so feel free to push back here. How often is often enough in terms of an email cadence in your mind, even if it's
Oh,
opportunistic?
well, I have thought about that because I've stolen it from Mark. Because as an allocator, I'm sort of now in a position, certainly not Mark Stevens or Sequoia, but I probably have, 5 to 15 out cold call outreaches over LinkedIn. Some people figure out. I mean, someone even found my Yahoo email address, which I only use for e-commerce and newsletters, so that was impressive. And so a lot of these people reach out. I've probably seen 500 decks over the past 2.5 years. I probably talked to a third of those people. You know that I like the small manager space. I find that it's dynamic and that's where the energy is. I also think that's where the alpha is. Now, it's also where the dispersion is. And so getting it right is super hard, which is why I try to spend as much time as I can. And what I'll tell managers, and I'll also tell startups that want to stay in touch, is if you're emailing me once a week, that's probably too often. If you're emailing me once every 6 months, that's probably too infrequent. You can choose if it's monthly or it's quarterly. Um, you know, I hate to admit this, I tend not to be able to read everyone's newsletters. I think a lot of folks fall into that camp, but one or two bullet points is really all it takes. Yeah, now you've also got me thinking that I've kind of stopped that habit myself. I've gotten a little bit lazier over the past 5, 6, 7 years. To be fair to myself, I'm reacting in my inbox. I mean, there are a lot
Yeah.
of folks that reach out to you, and I have empathy. I've been a partner in 4 funds in my career. So I don't know if your audience knows, but I describe myself as operator, investor, and allocator. And when I go to conferences or I speak at them or I just am an attendee, I don't do this much now, but in the past, I would say, how many folks do you know who've kind of touched all three? I call it the 3 legs of the stool. I've created this metaphorical stool to describe my career in Silicon Valley, and there's very few people who've touched all three. But whether I'm wearing the uh, allocator hat or I'm wearing the investor hat or the operator hat, in each instance, I should probably be sending out those emails myself to people. It just, I find myself right now reacting to an inbox where I'm working with startups, I'm working with funds, or I'm trying to invest in funds. And I'm not as good about proactively using email to keep relationships fresh.
If you were to proactively remind yourself to do so, what do you think would be the mechanisms you'd use to remind yourself?
Well, there's a lot of good technology now, right? I'm getting a little bit better at using AI for personal productivity. I mean, yeah, there's simple ticklers. There's things that you can. I mean, there's the tools are pretty basic. It's just a matter of going and using them, right? It's like having an untended garden. I don't need to reinvent the hoe. I don't need to reinvent the gardening hose. I don't need to. It's all there. I've just been lazy about using the implements.
Speaking of the three legs of the stool, and in the same line, you've told me that before, and I absolutely love it. You've also described yourself in two other sets of words, and you have such a proclivity with synthesizing information, which I absolutely love. One, you've described yourself as an asymmetric information junkie. And
Guilty as charged.
guilty as, or these are your own words. Two, you said you believe in the power of synthesis. And this is not
Yeah.
really a question, but it's kind of a question. Why do you describe yourself with those phrases?
Asymmetric information junkie. I don't know where that comes from. It probably, I mean, ever since I can remember, I've wanted to know information uh, that would provide insight. And the asymmetric nature of it is that that creates a competitive advantage, right? At least in business. Um, but look, we're in the venture business, and there's no Reg FD. There aren't quarterly calls that go out to the mass public. Um, Look at who was great at asymmetric information. Doug Leone called me about a company, right? And I was 32 years old and I was brand new in the venture business and I was a nobody. I mean, you never know where you're going to get great information. And I think we were talking earlier about, the marginal cost of that next endeavor. It can sometimes seem like there's no ROI in talking to the seventh person or the eighth person or the ninth person. And truth be told, in each individual instance, oftentimes there's not, but it that will manifest itself with real value occasionally, but the value will be disproportionate. So on a weighted basis, it totally makes sense to be an asymmetric information junkie and always seeking information. Now, you also have to come up against the fact that a lot of things are time certain. They have deadlines, and you can't
Yeah.
continue to be in research phase or information gathering phase. But we all have a sense for that cadence, and really having active grapevines of trusted sources, and then the synthesis is kind of a compatriot to that. There's two things about synthesis. One is, okay, now I just went out and I'm an asymmetric information junkie and I'm trying to figure out something about Anthropic or OpenAI, and I'm trying to speak to a top research scientist inside of OpenAI. Okay, that's one perspective. And then I'm talking to someone at Microsoft about OpenAI who's senior, and that's a different perspective. They're all biased by their perspectives. It's Rashomon, the old Japanese movie, and so you have to synthesize. You have to understand that everyone has a blind spot. You have to figure out how to mitigate that if you can really understand what that blind spot might be, and then slowly start to. It's like detectives do that all the time
Yeah.
when they're interviewing people. I think they must be like some of the OGs when it comes to being able to synthesize a bunch of different conversations and understanding the blind spot of the person who was an eyewitness, literally an eyewitness, still has a blind spot. So that's where those go in hand. Then there's a whole different part of synthesis where, when my kids were growing up, I used to say to them, this was way before AI. I would say, look, the machines already analyze better than we do. I mean, a calculator was already computing better than a human being when calculators were invented. But one of the things that I think is quintessentially human is to be knowledgeable across diverse disciplines and then to try to synthesize across those diverse disciplines. And I've seen it in action. My father has been much earlier in his career would tell stories about the nuclear physicists hanging out with the pathologists at the NYU Medical School. And they think totally differently and their disciplines are totally different, but being able to inform one another that led to small breakthroughs in their research.
I freaking love that. And so if I were to break down some of this and take this to a more tactical perspective, as you go out to find asymmetric information, and I'll leave this kind of broad, where do you think are the best sources for asymmetric information?
I think for me, the way I go about my day is you're asking a question that could be answered kind of globally, but specific to me, it's people. I really feel like talking to folks who have an understanding for a company or a fund and have had some actual experience with them, because I'm usually reacting to a business plan, like a first conversation, someone is pitching. And obviously, you know, I, I remember when I jumped from operations to being in venture, I thought I was going to be so amazing at it because
Yeah.
I knew where all the skeletons were buried in the startups that I worked for. And when we went and pitched for money, we always put lipstick on the pig and we buried the skeletons and we made it seem like we were the best thing since sliced bread. So I thought I would be able to catch
Yeah.
founders when they were doing that with me when I was sitting on the other side of the table as the investor. Well, it
Yeah.
turns out there's 1,000 ways to put lipstick on the pig, and there are 1,000 skeletons. And I had only seen like 5 or 6 because I only had, my 3 startup experiences. And so you need to deputize as many people as you possibly can to essentially triangulate.
I freaking love it. And this is that third leg or one of the legs of the stool where it's the operator part of the stool.
Yeah.
I'm curious for you, because you've been that, how do you approach asking someone about the skeletons in the back room when it is in every right of their incentive, whether themselves or a friend or someone who knows someone else, to not necessarily share that there are skeletons in the back room?
There's 2 types of skeletons. When you're another thing that I say, which is probably not 100% true, but I do think it's directionally true enough, even though I say it in sort of in a caricaturized way, which is you can do 2 weeks or 2 years of due diligence on a company. And particularly if you're like a mid-stage or later stage investor. And it's after the first board meeting. I have a friend who affectionately refers to it as the oh shit board meeting, where you show up and now you're on the inside and you learn all the bad stuff about the company that was hidden from you.
Yeah.
Now, is that to suggest you should just invest after 2 weeks because even after 2 years, you're still going to end up with skeletons you were unable to uncover? No, I still think process matters. And I think in prior conversations, you've learned that I believe deeply in process. But I also think that it's an important realization to have that you can't learn it all. I have an older son who's graduated college, and when he was looking at jobs and going through the interview process, I said the same thing to him. I said, you're only going to learn so much about these companies before you ultimately make a decision. It's after you join, like, within the first 2 weeks, you're going to learn where the bathroom is. You're going to get your key card. You're going to get your cubicle. You're going to get your login credentials. And you're going to learn all the bad things about the company over the water cooler, right? That you wouldn't have been able to access, just like you couldn't get the card key until after, you got the offer and you joined. There's just some information you're never going to have. So I think you have to appreciate that tension. Try and get as much as you can, but no, you can't know everything.
Let's say someone takes the 2-week approach, because the natural inclination for a lot of folks listening to this podcast is, let's just wait 2 years. Like, there's no harm in waiting 2 years. And I completely understand there is no harm in waiting 2 years, especially if you're investing in fund managers, because you know they're going to come back to you for their next fund as well.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say, I don't know that that's true with a startup.
Right.
By the way, this stool, I invented this stool. It could very easily be a chair and I'm missing a leg. It could be some warped piece of modern art at the MoMA that's got like 9 legs. So this is like totally made up.
But I love that. I love the imagery in which you empower people, whether it's the stool, it's the buried skeletons and the lipstick on the pig, and that creates a level of imagery in people's mind. And I think it inspires them to think in certain directions, which I think is really important, which is the whole purpose of words in the first place.
Sure. No. Well, look, I hope that's all true. I hope people get value out of this conversation. I'm having a ton of fun with you, but I know it's for a broader audience as well.
I'm going to ask for something I've resisted asking for since the beginning of this podcast. And this will only take 54 seconds. This is not about your money. This is for your subscription. 73% of you are not subscribed. If this is not your first time here, a subscription would go a really long way. And it tells me that you want to see more things like this. And it is the fuel to our fire to make this podcast better, to highlight and introduce new formats to you, to elicit insights and stories that you would want to hear, and to go deep on things that the world has never heard before. In fact, this will be the worst version of the podcast you will ever see again. If this is your first time here, hold that subscribe. We haven't earned your respect yet. This is our first date. And if you are already a subscriber, thank you. This podcast would not be where it is today without you.
So to get back to your question, I don't think that's true in the case of investing in startups. And it's probably not true in the case of investing in some of the brand name firms that are able to create scarcity and FOMO. But yes, I do think what you said is largely true for the thousands of managers. I mean, the 4,000 folks who've got some form of a venture fund. Also got to put up my hand to someone who's guilty. I don't mind getting to know someone over a longer period of time. The role that I play for the San Jose pension system as chairman of their investment committee, I don't get involved directly in manager selection, but I have helped shape that venture program. So while the CIO and his staff pick the managers, my fingerprints are over sort of the philosophy and the size of funds we invest in and our approach, which is to seek alpha and not to be in the beta of the asset class. I do spend a bunch of time with funds that may be still a little too new or a little too young for San Jose. But I'm upfront with folks. I say, look, it's unlikely that you're going to get an investor like San Jose in this fund, or quite frankly, any institutional investor. Smaller newer managers tend to leverage high net worth individuals and small family offices more. But I tell them you are beginning a relationship. And this is why also, maybe this is a tip that is accidentally coming out in this part of the conversation. I get the value of solo GPs and GPs who have sort of that magnetic effect. My friend Noah Lichtenstein likes to say he's looking for GPs who are magnets, as opposed to ones who are looking for needles under haystacks. And so I always like to give attribution to people when they come up with an insight that I really like and they package it in a pithy way. If you are a co-founding team, you can have one of the partners spend their time developing these long fused relationships like
Yeah.
pension funds, endowments, foundations. And I think it's important to do that. And I think 2 years is a long time, but just to put my San Jose hat on, no, not my Red Sox hat.
Let me switch it out.
Look, we have a 30, 40-year time horizon in the way we're looking at the portfolio we're trying to do. There really is no sense of urgency, and venture is a small portion of what we do. And we have to get it right. When you're looking at earlier managers, I mean, there aren't a lot of numbers. First of all, the numbers in venture capital can be tremendously misleading because the industry at any given point in time is primarily advertising or it's promoting the TVPI of a given fund or of the industry. And TVPI is not the same thing as the ultimate distributed capital and what your MOIC will be on a distributed basis. So that's one of the challenges of the asset class, period, full stop. But it's even more true in the earlier stage where you might not even have enough TVPI. You might not have enough portfolio development. And it's just hard for an institution like a San Jose, and quite frankly, even the family office that I've helped set up, really what you're doing is you're meeting people and you're betting on people. And if I can get to know someone over 6 months or 12 months or 2 years, and then also see how they're actually investing qualitatively, right? I mean, the type of deals they're getting into, and also how they think about venture as a business. So this is another shtick of mine that I've heard myself say way too often. So as it comes out of my mouth with you, I'm already bored by myself. I feel like a politician who gives the same stump speech I have no idea how politicians do that. It's impressive to say the same things over and over again, but to make it seem like you're saying it for the first time, the 50th time is incredibly impressive to me. So sorry, I
I
just
will
crapped
also
on DC.
want to caveat here. And I know this is the DC asshole here, but uh, there are people who are listening to you for the first time. And even though this is the 50th time for you, to them, this is the first time they're hearing it.
Yeah, understood. But I know it's the 50th, so I'm bored
Yeah.
with myself already. And what I was about to say is when I coach uh, new GPs or young funds, I will say we colloquially refer to this as the venture business. And I think, and I think it's throwaway venture business, but it's actually has some import for me because those are two different words. And the venture part, if I'm going to be cheeky, anyone can do it. Any three people or two people can sit around and decide whether or not they like a company at a Monday partners meeting or at a coffee shop. Now, some people are better at it than others. Don't get me wrong. That matters. There's the quality of having taste and maybe being a stock picker. But it is also a business. portfolio construction. There's a bunch of folks who will have their fund zero,
Yeah.
and it'll be a collection of their angel investments, and they'll use that to demonstrate track record. It does demonstrate track record for me, but a lot less so than I think people think, because collecting random lottery tickets is not the same thing as constructing a portfolio. Having to issue term sheets or having to fight your way into a syndicate where someone else has issued the lead term sheet, but you have to you have to get the founder and the lead to make room for you. Um, Things like your legal back office and your entire back office and compliance, all that kind of stuff. Like there are outsourced services for this. I'm not saying you have to do it internally, but there are folks who actually emphasize that and think about that. And I personally believe that folks who pay attention to and care about the business part of the venture business, because they're doing it day in and day out, incrementally on the margin, they're adding value ultimately to the results that they're going to create with the underlying investments. And so, I don't know that you're good at that because we've had 3 phone calls and you tell me, yeah, or, a phone call, a Zoom and a coffee at Coupa Cafe. And then you tell me there's FOMO because someone from Lightspeed is investing in you and everyone at YC loves you. Like I hear this 1,000 times.
Right.
That's not indicative that those shortcuts. That's like people saying, you ever see folks on LinkedIn? It's like Harvard, ex McKinsey,
Yeah.
like they're putting all the signals out there to say they must,
In their bio.
right? Right. And how many thousands of people have worked at those companies and what percentage of them have turned out to be 5x returning on a DPI basis, 5x MOIC venture capitalists? I don't see any correlation. So I need to get to know you is the bottom line.
There's so much of what you mentioned earlier about the business portion of the venture business that I'd highly recommend people just to re-listen to just now, because everything you've mentioned are things as an LP that individually, personally, I'd like to understand. So taking an example, you mentioned, hey, does the lead investor make space for you on the cap table? I actually spend times like, why does a lead investor want you on the cap table? Why will the founder fight for you if a lead
Yeah.
investor does come in who wants 20, 25% ownership? And then I go talk to the lead investor, the partner, not the firm, but the partner, and go like, hey, why did you leave room? Did you even know this person existed? Did you have any relationship prior to the founder even telling you about that this person was also investing or wanted to be investing?
Yeah. And if you demonstrate that over 12 months or 24, because you said 2 years,
Hey, I
I
was just
can go
quoting you,
back.
2 weeks or 2 years.
Well, yeah, that's true. But some period of time, end period. I can go back and now I can do that asymmetric. Let's tie all these threads back together. I can be that asymmetric information junkie because I either know the investors you've invested with because I've been around you for 25 years, or I'm 1 degree separated and know I can get into that authentic conversation like I can at the bus stop where they'll trust, they'll share some stuff with me because they know my superpowers. I won't tell anyone, right? It all
Yeah.
kind of fits and works together in that situation. That's a far cry from all the business plans that I get. And I think you know that I'm on the selection committee for Raise Global. I'm a big fan of Ben and Acadian and the work that they've done
Huge fan. We had
with that
Adam on their
platform.
team last season or 2
Oh, that's
seasons ago,
awesome.
actually. Yeah.
I bet that was a good show. And when I see the slide that says here are seed or pre-seed investments, and then here are all the top tier firms who marked it up in the next round, the top tier firms are raising ginormous amounts of money. They've got to put it everywhere. So I don't know if that doesn't, to me, that is not indicative of your ability to get into a good deal.
Yeah.
That folks with huge funds spray and pray is not a fair way to describe it, but who can invest broadly, have decided to place a bet down, on the same number at the roulette wheel that you did. What's far more powerful to me is how you got into a great deal to begin with.
I came across this fairly recently, but I'm forgetting the origin of who told me about it. But the original or origination of the line is from Andy Wiseman at USV, which is process drives repeatability.
I'll quote him. I don't steal other people's ideas. I think that's great. I
I
do
think
think
it's a great
process
line.
drives repeatability.
I think it goes back to what you were mentioning earlier, where it's not the fact that you were in X hot deal, Y outlier deal. It's like, what did you do to get in, and have you worked it into your own rotation before or after. So then that continues to be a process that helps you get in the best deals.
Look, I think process sometimes gets, actually, I don't know this to be true, but this is my own bias. I was never a process person. Again, that comes back to like, you have ADD, you're not good at process. And so I think as I've matured, I just have such a greater appreciation for process because I realized the absence of it earlier in my career and in my
Yeah.
secondary schooling. And so maybe I'm overemphasizing it. Maybe you and everyone else understands the value and the importance of it. But I do think some people think it's antithetical to creativity or flexibility, adaptability, or nimbleness. We should be able to hold opposite thoughts in our head at the same time, and we
I
should
agree.
be able to react. And so process gives you the guidelines by which, because the alternative is jump ball. The
Yeah.
alternative is just to live in a chaotic environment. And so from that point of view, I think process is critical. And, within that process, you deviate when appropriate, but you know why you're deviating. It's intentional. It's not
Yeah.
reactive.
There's a there was a podcast I was listening to recently, on a Diary of a CEO, which is such a good podcast, by the way, where
Oh,
he
neat.
interviews a it's like by Stephen Bartlett, British accent, love British accents in general,
Sure.
but it's a long form. I think it's a 1.5 hour, 2 hour kind of podcast where he really uncovers what makes certain individuals really spike. And one of the ones he had on fairly recently was Kevin O'Leary, who I think most people might know
Yeah,
from Shark Tank. And
sure.
Kevin, I didn't know this, but early in his career, he actually worked for Steve Jobs. And in the process of just like, I'm going to summarize this, but in the process of working for Steve Jobs, the question ended up becoming like, why do you think Steve Jobs is the kind of person which he is? What did you learn from him? And one thing he said was like 80% of his time, or he would figure out the top 3 to 5 things that you need to figure out in the next 18 hours. 3 to 5 things, nothing more, no 2 year plan, no 1 year plan, just for the 3 to 5 things, the next 18 hours, all you do is focus on those things. And those 3 to 5 priorities would occupy 80% of his time.
Uh,
20% of his time and would be noise. And he would allow for noise 20% of the time because he's looking for that creativity, that unstructured nature to be inspired in different ways. So I think it actually goes back to a lot of what you're saying. And I'll also mention here, I know it's not psychologically backed, but I know a lot of people cite it, which is the Myers-Briggs test. And on a Myers-Briggs test, the last letter is P or J. So P as in perceiving, J as in judging. J is supposed to be you're supposed super organized and you have a schedule for everything. You even like put down on the one end of the spectrum, you even put down that you spend 5 minutes in the morning brushing your teeth, and that is in your schedule. That's one element of it. And the P, the perceiving side, is like super go with the flow, cavalier on the other side of the spectrum. I admittedly sit on the P side of the spectrum. I more go with the flow. I don't have as much structure in my life, but I respect and admire process. And I have incorporated a couple processes in my life now because it hedges myself from being just doing whatever I want to do, which doesn't drive myself towards priorities at all. Anyways, I'm going to get off my soapbox.
oh, it's interesting. You got me thinking, but I don't want to keep. We can move on to your next question because I was starting to think about what you said about yourself for myself.
This is the process of the podcast, right? This is discovery. We learn something about ourselves. We learn something about
Yeah.
each other, and hopefully the folks listening to this also enjoy it as well. Maybe as one last allocator investing kind of question, you, as you mentioned earlier, sit on as the CIO of the investment committee, or not the CIO, sorry, you
Sure.
sit on the
Sure. Yeah.
chairman
Yeah.
of the investment committee at San Jose, and you helped design their portfolio as a pension that you've historically described as underfunded.
Uh-huh.
How does one start to design a portfolio for a pension like that?
So just to be clear, I feel like I've played a stronger role in developing the venture program, the overall strategic asset allocation. That work is done in the committee, so it's
Yeah.
several of us in the committee, and then ultimately the entire board votes on that. So I just want to be clear that I'm one of seven when ultimately it comes to the allocation. But what we I mean, there's so many different elements to what we tried to do when I took over the investment committee. One of the things I might as well put this in this podcast because I say this pretty frequently too. I've already referenced sort of being a bit of a disaster with note taking, and maybe not in this podcast, but with you at Phil's, not being like the world, not being the world's greatest student. And in eighth grade, school starts to kind of get serious because they're preparing you for high school, and grades matter for whatever that is worth. And I would sit in class and the teacher would talk. And a lot of times, if I liked what the teacher was saying, I really loved math and science in middle school. Like I was totally engaged. But then there's just times I'm distracted. I'm looking around and I'm trying to figure out which kid in the back is playing the little football game with the triangle. And maybe if I can sneak my seat back there and start playing too without the teacher noticing. And then there's a test on a Friday. I'm like, I have no notes. I wasn't paying attention. So I have this friend. She's still a dear friend of mine. Her name was Susie. And I would always run up to her on a Thursday and say, Susie, I have to borrow your notes. And she's the most gracious. She would always share her notes. She could have been competitive and said, no, that's one kid who's going to get a bad grade and I don't need to help him. But she was like the opposite of that, like super collaborative, great generosity of spirit. And she helped me get through many eighth grade classes. And the lesson I think I learned subconsciously was it's better to draft off of other people than to reinvent the wheel. And so at San Jose, we realized, and this is a well-known fact, that the Canadians have the best pension system globally. I hear good things about the Australian superannuations, but I think the gold standard is the Canadians. So the San Jose CEO, I mean, at the request of the board, we went out and did an RFP for consultants to help us rethink the entire investment program. And when I say rethink, I'm including all the processes, not just like what are we investing in. This comes also
Yeah.
ties back to this notion of how important process is. So we wanted to learn, what did the Canadians do so well from a process point of view? To make a long story short, we couldn't adopt everything. There are certain things that they do. They pay their staff way better than American pension plans pay their staff. They pay their trustees. I mean, this is essentially a volunteer job. It's super time consuming, and it's a public service, which I certainly don't mind. But I think there's a market case to be made for paying something, because then the quality of people, you'll get better people than me who will want to be trustees. And so
I don't want you to
there were certain
discount
things.
yourself like that. This hurts my heart. If
No, I don't.
anything,
That was not meant to be false immodesty. I'm not immodest. There are things I know I'm really good at, and I
yeah.
am a highly confident person in things that I think I should be confident, and I'm not confident in things that I don't think I'm that good at. And there's always someone better than you. My father always said that, right? There's always someone smarter, better looking, better at tennis, which was my competitive sport. And at some point, you got to be happy with where you are. So I'm super happy with where I netted out in the
Yeah.
genetic lottery. But if you did pay trustees, whatever the an amount is, more people would apply. If more people would apply, you'd have a more talent rich pool. And it stands to reason you could pick out someone better than me to be a trustee. But I think they've been fortunate to have me as a trustee. I don't think I've been a bad trustee. I think I've actually been an excellent trustee. So I was not meaning to be immodest there. I just was pointing out a structural flaw in the way
Okay.
American pensions go about things that Canadians don't. And we couldn't adopt everything they do. However, there were many things we could do. And so, from a governance perspective, the way we drafted our investment policy statement, which actually just got renewed and approved at the last board meeting, because it's a good practice every 5 years to look at your documents and to make sure that they're current. Um, and then we took a totally different approach to strategic asset allocation. One thing embedded in that was we did a risk analysis. And what's a risk analysis? We figured out what our risk budget was. There's this thing that's kind of becoming a flavor of the month in institutional investing, particularly for really large plans, which is called TPA, total portfolio allocation. I am going to go on record on this very prominent podcast saying I roll my eyes when I go to conferences and I see that there's an agenda topic with a few speakers on TPA. It's crazy to me because the entire The reason you engage in strategic asset allocation is to take a total portfolio approach to begin with. So the
Yeah.
fact that we now have to call it out as something unique and something tactical that you feed back into the way you do asset allocation is truly ass backwards. So I just am always it's always I know why it happens, because some of these systems are so big that everyone starts they have their sleeve or their sub asset allocation, and because they're so big, there's a team. Right, we're a small team at San Jose. I always say we're small but mighty. I've got the best investment staff in the state. I'm convinced, and the best CIO. But when you become big, you become bureaucratic. So the venture guys are doing something on their own. The private equity folks are doing something on their own. The private credit, the fixed income. And so maybe as they're filling out their mandates, they become so tactical or in the weeds with their sub asset classes that there's no longer like the total portfolio approach being taken within those discrete decisions in any sub asset class. And so I'm totally sympathetic to the managerial and bureaucratic issues that might arise. But we have always had to take that total portfolio approach. And in taking that total portfolio approach, we have to understand how much risk we can take on the portfolio.
Hmm.
I have asked the city, well, not for years, but when I first joined, what's our backstop? Like, how much risk can we take? If we take too much risk and it injures our ability to make pension payments to our retirees, can you float a pension obligation bond? Would you raise taxes? What would you do to negotiate a change in benefits with the unions? Well, no politician's going to go on record and talk about that stuff, right? So, but silence gave us the freedom to go and do our own risk analysis. So we hired a risk firm. They're amazing, and we took all the drawdowns that have taken place back to in the U.S. capital markets back to the Great Depression, and then we did a bunch of stochastic modeling because the next black swan is going to look very different like the old ones. This is still art, not science, even though there's a lot of math involved. Let's not let math be some kind of oracle, which I think we have this I don't know, this comfort in doing like that math can give us these truisms. But
Yeah.
it definitely helped inform some of the decisions we made. And we went from a certain volatility on the portfolio and increased it by 50%. And we thought we could increase it by 50% without any bad black swan making it difficult to meet our obligation to our retirees. I hope that we have picked the right number, but by increasing by 50%, it's helped us seek more alpha, right? That's now we take more risk. Risk works both ways. We try to mitigate it, obviously, but anytime you increase the volatility, it's a pendulum. It can go in the other direction as well. But we also have the plan thinking in a 30, 40, 50-year time horizon, right? We are long time horizon. And so once we decided we could ramp up the volatility, then that informed strategic asset allocation. How much are we going to be in growth assets versus preservation assets? We're heavy growth. And it's paid off for the last 8 years. We were the second worst performing pension plan when I took over the IC, and 3 years later, we were number two, and we've stayed comfortably top decile for this entire run. Want to be sure that the CIO and the staff get the disproportionate credit for it. They're the ones who do it as their full-time day job. But I think a lot of this process was really important. And an analogy I've been using of late, so I've heard myself say this a few times, but not so many times that I'm sick of myself, is I feel like what the board of trustees did really well at San Jose from the, say, 2016, 2017, 2018 time period onward was to take a professional franchise front office and fix some of the things like maybe how you draft your players, how you get under the salary cap, and all the things so that the franchise could go hire this world-class coach, our CIO, Prabhu Pilani, and help and allow it gave him the ability. We had some good teammates already there in the investment office, and he kept them. And then he hired some new people who are fantastic. So he and his team that on the field, they took the 2-15 ball club and turned it into a 15-2 ball club. And so they get all the credit for that, but I don't think they could have done it without what the board did in the front office.
First of all, baseball runs deep in your blood.
That was a football. I meant that to be football with the 15
Oh,
and
it's
2,
football.
but
Okay,
yes,
okay. So
yeah,
I clearly don't know my
it,
sports.
no, but it could work for baseball. It could work for European soccer clubs. It could work for
Yeah,
Indian IPL clubs, which I follow. Like the idea that the front office has to be working so that you can let your talent, to unleash your talent is, I think, universal.
that's so beautiful. There are so many questions. Like I love how every time you bring up these pithy comments, I have more questions. I have a notebook to prove for the fact that I have more questions, but I want to be cognizant of time here. So I want to come for the curtain call in a bit. And so these are what I
Okay.
call perspective questions at this point. And they'll take a step back away from all the investing stuff for now. And I'm sure people will reach out with tons more questions. So maybe to start things off, from your wife who is an attorney and was an attorney at one of the largest legal firms to having a father-in-law who I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, was the treasurer of the electricians union, to your dad who taught you the beauty of quantum physics since you were 12, and we talked about physicists and pathologists, to being friends with Jerry Yang and working with Peter Thiel, and to Susie in eighth grade who gave you her math notes. Undeniably, you are surrounded by a myriad of impressive movers and shakers. So I'm curious for you, is there an individual outside of your immediate family or maybe well-known individuals that has disproportionately shaped the way you think about things today?
Wow. You mentioned all those people. I mean, I'm glad you're not asking more about my father, my father-in-law, or my wife, because I would probably start to get emotional, and I only want to bear so much of myself. I think we're all entitled to our privacy. Um, man, I am just so lucky to have been born to the parents I was, and then just all these people I've had in my life, which really starts from the childhood and upbringing they gave me. But I have said, and I do mean this genuinely, I was a pretty cocky schmuck in high school. I mean, I think I was kind, and I think I cared about people too. But I think my insecurities manifested in being kind of loud and brash. And I have no idea why all these high school teachers and college professors, and then even mentors early in my career saw something in me. And like, I think there was like, all right, we got to help this kid get over it. Like there was almost charity work there. Like it's so clear that this guy's working through some insecurities, and there's probably something inside there. So maybe it was an Alcoholics Anonymous thing that they all had to do, where and then you go find. I don't know what it was, but I've had you use the word disproportionate. I've had so many people mentor me as friends and intellectually, and just share their wisdom. So you're asking me to pick out one or two. There was a juncture in my life when I had quit being an attorney. I'd been an attorney for all of 11 months. I hated every minute of it. I was a round peg in a square hole. And I went off and did something pretty cockamamie. I thought I could go raise money for technology, infrastructure, retail, real estate projects in India. This was in the mid 90s. The country had just liberalized its economy 4 years earlier. I saw more change in those 4 years that I had in my entire childhood. From birth until age 20, I was going consistently. The country had not changed. It was a socialist country. And you just saw everything looked more vibrant. And I mean, this is 1995. India's it's the totally different spot now, which is personally inspiring to me as well. Um, but I failed at being able to close any deals. I was 25. I looked like I was 18. So I'm sure that doesn't instill confidence when you walk into Advent International's offices when you're pitching to Bill Draper. Bill said no to me for everything, but then he ended up becoming a mentor. So I won in the end. What a gift to have had him spending time with me, just like Mark Stevens, 4 or 5 times a year. Well,
Yeah.
with Bill, it was longer term and more consistent.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm sitting here feeling like a total failure because I've got friends who are at Goldman Sachs and they're at McKinsey and they're at Sullivan and Cromwell, and a life that was really never meant for me. As I look back, I wasn't wired that way. And so a friend whose father had my family on my dad's side are mostly academics. And so I didn't have a lot of family that were business role models. But this guy, Rob Held Sr., had sold a company called Chipcom to 3Com in the early 90s, and he was just kind of sitting on some boards now. He had great venture capitalists backing him, wonderful guy. And I just said to my friend Rob Jr., I said, "Right, Rob, can I talk to your dad? I'm kind of at a crossroads." And it would take about an hour and a half for me to really fully explain uh, the amount of gratitude I have for his mentorship and just the vote of confidence that he gave me at a point where I was feeling pretty down about myself and my prospects. But he hung in there with me and just a lot of wisdom. So, yeah, outside of the people you named, it would probably be Rob Helt Sr.
I think there's no better place to end on than on
Then
that
Rob,
note.
I think he's a great person to end on. Absolutely.
He's a phenomenal person. Anurag, thank you so, so, so much for saying yes to this podcast. And thank you for sharing your insights.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. This was a fun conversation. It was Phil's all over again, except I'm drinking water this time.
Same, same. We're water, no coffee. We didn't even talk about your, should I call it the coffee addiction?
Oh my God. Uh, that's also a podcast in and of itself.
We'll
I
say that
love
for
coffee.
we'll say that for an episode too. I think when you last told me, it was like what 2-3 cups of coffee a day, and I was like, this is insane. Like one is enough.
Yeah, I do go decaf in the afternoon, but my 23andMe confirmed that I'm caffeine sensitive. But I drink it all the way through the night, but I do switch to decaf.
Anyways, Anurag, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure.
For me too. Are we allowed to say the date on which we're having this conversation? Can I say Happy 4th of July? I hope you have a wonderful
Absolutely.
3-day weekend.
You're
Yep.
you're destroying the fourth wall here. There's this mystique that's built up in the podcast, and you're just like, you know what? It's the 4th of July. Yes, you're right. Happy
Well,
4th of July.
well, you can edit that part out, but people should know you're the hardest working man in show business. You're working on a holiday.
Same back at you. Like you said yes to doing this on a holiday, so thank you so much. Until the next time, Superclusters fans, see you soon.
You're going to hear me pause and say, boy, that's a good question over and over and over again.
Last thing, very last housekeeping item. What would make our time together today worthwhile for you? What would make this an episode that you would want to share with your close friends?
Oh, good question. You know, I'm really confident that based on the conversations we've had and even the questions that you asked at the Mayfield event, that stuff is just organically going to pop out. I think you do a good job of drawing out authenticity in people. So hopefully, uh, I'm in mind, body, and spirit prepared to provide that to you. And I don't have an agenda. I think it's important for LPs to have a community. And there were some, massive LinkedIn groups and they're pretty impersonal. And I feel like LPs don't collaborate enough together and one another. So, my goal here is just to add a voice into the podcast ether that hopefully is sending out a sonar of collaborate, share ideas, make each other smarter so that the people who, their submarine underwater is sending out a similar sonar will be able to connect.
I love that imagery. I really, really do.
All right, well, maybe we'll use it again when we hit record.
Hey, Superclusters fans, David from Post here. If you enjoyed today's episode, all I ask are 3 small things. 1, there's a little red subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, if and only if you enjoyed this episode, that's the button to click and you'll get many more presents, insights, and brilliant minds delivered to you just like this one very, very soon. 2, if you could do me a favor, let me know down in the comments what your favorite moment from this episode was. 3, it'd mean a lot to me if you could share this with one other friend who could gain a lot from listening to today's cosmos of insights. And also let me know if there's something I should have asked down in the comments, and if there's enough interest, we will bring Anurag back. I promised myself to record 100 episodes of Superclusters, so every comment, question, review helps me make this experience more meaningful and helpful to you, and makes investing in venture a little less scary and a lot more friendly. And lastly, I want to share a quick disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only, and are solely the views of myself and the guest alone. They are not representative of any organization we're a part of. None of the views expressed herein constitute legal, investment, business, or tax advice. Any allusions or references to funds or companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment recommendations. Consult a professional investment advisor prior to making any investment decisions. That is all from me. See you on the next.